Shen Yazhi, depicting what I see along the shore from a moving boat at Bianzhou. Ancient trees in the early light have gone grey. The autumn forest brushes the bank with fragrance. Pearls of dew, a spider's web so fine. Threads of gold, a rabbit's hair so long. Autumn waves from time to time return frothed. Startled fish suddenly bump against the boat. The milkweed's mist catches hold of green willow threads. The sour jujube's fruit is stitched into red sacks. Riotous ears of grain wave like flying squirrels' tails. Drooping roots hang down like phoenix entrails. I'm merely holding one washed foot. Who says I can be compared to the Lang poet? Okay, so this is a poem by Shen Yazhi, and we could start by saying a few things about him. He lived from about 781 to 832, and he is a pretty standard mid-Tang poet. He came from an illustrious family. Among his ancestors was the poet Shen Yue. And, well, the most important thing we can say about it, he had a typical middling career. He passed the Jinshi examinations rather late after having tried a series of times, and during his travels, he actually met the great mid-Tang poets, especially Han Yu. He would become a devoted follower of Han Yu's style, as can be seen in the poem we've read today. So he met Han Yu in Luoyang. He met other poets that we've talked about, like Li He or Jia Dao. When he actually passed the examinations, he was examined by a friend of Han Yu's. And, well, that's as much as we can say about his career. An interesting thing is that he is actually more appreciated today and better known as a writer of fiction than as a poet. As a writer of fiction, there are at least two pieces that are relatively famous. They're the typical Tang stories. One of them is the Qin Mengji, the record of a dream of Qin, which is very similar to the account of the governor of Southern Branch or the record of events within a pillow. That is the typical story of a scholar official falling asleep in an inn and having dreams of a whole lifetime of power and glory. The other famous story of his is, what was it called? Feng Yang Chuan, about a knight errant called Feng Yang, allegedly a story based on real facts. This was a knight errant who killed his lover when his lover suggested that he should kill her husband, and in the end he gets pardoned for doing the morally virtuous thing. But anyway, as a poet, he has poems that represent very well the mid-Tang style, and especially the Han Yu style of poetry. So this poem, let's go back to it. The poem is a descriptive landscape poem. It's describing the sights that can be seen from a boat at Bianzhou. Bianzhou, moderately important city at this time. It will become very important in the succeeding 5 dynasties and in the Northern Song, when it will become the actual capital of China, known by its modern name, Kaifeng. Okay, so this is a landscape poem, the typical impressionistic landscape poem of describing the sights that can be seen from a boat. And, we've already encountered lots of poems like this. It also has as a sub-theme, besides the description of nature, it introduces at the end this sort of sub-theme about the unrecognized worthy. But we'll talk about that when we comment the last couplet. The poem it must be an old-style poem, I suspect, which probably makes sense. I imagine the old-style poetry was more popular among the mid-Tang poets than the more rigid, regulated and polished and how can I say this? Not superficial, but like more literally contemporary and over-polished regulated poem. This is pentasyllabic, but it's 12 lines, so 6 couplets. And it's very characteristic because this poem includes many elements of the typical Hanyu style. Basically, it's difficult diction and it's weird figurative language. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet as usual. First couplet. Ancient trees in the early light have gone grey. The autumn forest brushes the bank with fragrance. So, as usual, first couplet locates us. We already have the title. We know we are near Bianzhou. We are moving along the river, passing through the shore. So the poem opens with a sight and a smell. Yeah. So the first thing that is seen is ancient trees. So these ancient trees seem grey in the light. So we have the spatial location, but now we also have the time of day. It's morning. So, or at least the poem begins with morning. The ancient trees in the early light seem grey. And the autumn forest, so not only the trees, but the whole forest as such, brushes the bank, which is a visual image, with fragrance. So we have the smell element. So it's autumn forest, which again, the first line gave us the time of day, the second line gives us the season, which is the stereotypical Chinese season for composing melancholy, slightly sad, bittersweet poems on the passage of time. So we have, as we say, visual, the forest, the trees, and aromatic, the smell, the fragrances of autumn and of the trees. So as usual, the following couplets will pull out, will detail, will zoom in onto the nature that has been generally described. So we've got trees in the bank. What can you see in those trees in that forest lining the bank? Second couplet, pearls of dew, a spider's web so fine, threads of gold, a rabbit hair so long. Very clear parallelistic couplet, pearls, gold, threads, dew, spider, rabbit, web, hair, fine, long. So we get in each of these two lines a juxtaposition of a luxurious element, threads of gold and pearls. They are not real gold and real pearls, but they are elements of nature that look like the pearl, that look like pearls, and that look like gold. Well, the pearls are pearls of dew. It says, a spider's web so fine. So this might reference a real spider's web that the person is seeing, or it might refer to some plant which grows up winding up a tree. This is clearly the case with rabbit's hair. It's not a real rabbit's hair. It's a euphemistic name for a plant which grows by winding up a tree. So we got these two natural elements, spider's web, rabbit's hair, plants that are growing attached to trees, and they look like pearls of dew, like shiny, and like threads of gold. Third couplet. So the third couplet moves us from the surrounding forest on the banks of the river to the boat itself in which the poetic persona is traveling. Autumn waves from time to time return frothed. Startled fish suddenly bump against the boat. So you have these images of things bumping up, coming to the boat and to the poetic persona, whether it be waves that return and make a froth, or whether it be fish who hit against the boat and, are startled. So you get these images of horizontal movement approaching and hitting the boat on the water. And they're also nature, waves and fish, the river. We've seen the forest, now we see the river. Next couplet, which I think is the fourth. The milkweed's mist catches hold of green willow threads. The sour jujube's fruit is stitched into red sacks. So here we seem to be going back again to the bank, from the river to the bank. But now instead of just focusing on the trees and on the plants, we get a more focused, zoomed in view of, it's also trees and that might be lining the bank, but more specifically green willows and sour jujubes. of the sour jujubes, the poetic, the delightful image is the red sacs that its fruits are forming. So this bright red against the background of probably browns and greens. And the milkweed's mist catches hold of green willow thread. So we have the green of the willows, but we have a whitish mist that matches, that covers those green willow threads. So colors associated with specific trees on the shore. Or perhaps we're moving along and now we're out of the wild forest part and we're in more a subdued, tamed type of forest or plants that are being cultivated. In fact, this would seem to be the case because the next couplet clearly puts us into sites of agricultural land, not sites of wild forest. Fifth couplet, riotous ears of grain wave like flying squirrels' tails. Drooping roots hang down like phoenix entrails. Now, these images are probably the most shocking ones in the poem because, you don't regularly encounter as sights of nature or as objects of comparison. The entrails, the innards of a phoenix, or the tails of flying squirrels. This is the typical difficult diction figurative language that is the trademark of Hanyu in some of the obscure mid-Tang poets, resurrecting fancy old-fashioned words. They were part, most of them, in their prose writings of the Guwen movement that was basically seeking to restore some of the classical language from remote antiquity. So, yeah, riotous ears of grain. It's autumn, so grain is ready for harvesting. It's in full grain. Yeah, they look like tails shaking in the wind, we might imagine. Especially the millet, if it were millet. But, ears of corn also look like that, or could look like that. And the roots, probably these drooping roots of trees on the bank, that are very visible. So like phoenix entrails, like this thick, dark brownish, intestine-like looking thing. And finally, the last couplet. The last couplet brings a slight change from the purely naturalistic descriptive to the more subjective point of view, like I'm merely holding one washed foot. Who says I could be compared to the Zanlang poet? The Zanlang poet is Chu Yuan. So this poem ends with this couplet on the archetypal scholar official who does not get promoted or listened to by the ruler, and obviously Shen Yazhi is equating himself as such with the unrecognized worthy. Yeah? And the one washed foot, washing your feet in the water was only washing one of his feet, purifying himself from the dirt of the world of an unrecognizing bureaucracy or government which is not enlightened enough to grant the poetic persona the position and the attention he deserves. So that's all for today. So as you see, this is if we read further poems by Hanyu, which we might, based on his importance, he is a bit underrepresented in the 300 Tang poems anthology, although his reputation was more as a writer of prose than as a poet. But if we include more poems by Hanyu, we will encounter this sort of diction and this sort of weird imagery.